It's lovely to be here, Kevin.
Yes.
With your, as you just said in the wings, the picture of the dictator behind.
Get rid of that and make it easier.
It's the title of the talk is a bit all-encompassing, the arts in Ireland, which there's kind of it's rather a large subject. So we'll touch on certain bases that
Sure.
especially reflect your role in the Arts Council, where you took over as chairman in summer, I think 2019,
Yep.
which was, well, you were there a little bit more than a wet weekend before the world collapsed on us and everything changed, and that was not what you were expecting at all, as it wasn't for anybody, and so we find ourselves now. At this point, we're not through the pandemic, but things have stabilised. A lot of other stuff going on as well. And we're in a post-pandemic or coming towards a post-pandemic world or a living with pandemic situation. And I'm wondering how you think that is reflected in the world of arts and culture and how it will be reflected as time goes on. I think, for example, that there's a lot of burnout around in the wider population, but also within the arts community, and there are other issues as well. I don't if
it's I suppose like my entire period as chair has been primarily dominated by COVID. I took over as chair, was appointed in the summer of 2019, so very much settling in those early months. Although I had a major task with my board colleagues in having to recruit a new director. And I know Maureen Kennedy is here, the director of the Arts Council. Maureen and myself spoke on the phone on I think it was the last day of February of 2020, when she was offered the job as director of the Arts Council, and we met in the Westin Hotel in Dublin the following week to talk about the role and the job, and I was talking about things that I was excited about trying to achieve as chair, but had to park as we were in this interim period with no director. So we were talking about when this COVID thing is over in the summer, we'll go to this, we'll do that, we'll do the other thing, and of course, 2 weeks later, the world was in lockdown. On the 18th of March, I sat in the Arts Council boardroom in Merrion Square with one of the financial director. We didn't have a director because we'd offered a position, but Maureen wasn't starting till the summer, and all of my board colleagues were on screen, and I didn't see them again in person for over 2 years. So like it really hit as it hit everywhere. It hit the Arts Council, it hit the sector, and it's been a roller coaster 2.5 years. I'm not sure it's over, and I continuously say we're in the early stages of the recovery from COVID. As long as the virus is with us, we will be starting and stopping and starting and stopping in every walk of life. My day job is in DCU, in the School of Communications. You see it in the Irish Times in the newsroom, and the arts sector is the same. It's stop-start, and that will be with us for quite some time. And that leads to all sorts of issues now. There's the disruption. Like I was down in the West Cork Chamber Music Festival a couple of weeks ago, and they very kindly asked. It's funny. It was the first invitation that came in 2019 when I was appointed chair of the Arts Council. Would I open the West Cork Festival, the music festival? And I said yes. So that was for the summer of June of 2020. Of course, that didn't happen. So we rolled it forward and said, look, I'll come down next summer. And June of 21, they were online. So I said, we'll come down next summer. So that was June of 22. So Francis Humphries, who's the fantastic director of the festival down in Bantry, when he was introducing me, he said, it's taken this man 3 years to get here.
He was walking.
But we're delighted he's here. But people like Francis Humphries and John Crumlish, Paul Fahey here in Galway, they've put in a tremendous shift. And they're, the staff of the arts organisations, the boards, the voluntary boards, in the same position as myself, chairing the Arts Council. It's a voluntary position. The volunteers, they've all put in a tremendous shift, and it's been tough going. The stopping, nothing happening, the online, and now back, and the uncertainty. That opening night in West Cork and Bantry, they were to have 2 concerts. and one of the concerts had to be cancelled because one of the musicians couldn't travel because of COVID. So they had to, at the last minute, reorganise their schedule. So we're seeing that in terms of disruptions. You ask what's post-COVID, or as we're living through this recovery from COVID period, disruption is one thing. That is a huge drain on the people who make the art happen, but it's a cost. Alongside that, we're also seeing, in terms of box office and audience, and it's great to see people here, but it's not consistent. Different art forms, different nights, different places. Audiences are not fully back. We've seen some recent research. In some of the box office takings down by 20%. Really? So that's a double whammy coming out of COVID in terms of continued disruption, and that is the not just to the programming and the mental, physical well-being of everybody, the stresses and strains, but the financial cost of that, and then there's the financial cost of the box office. And I suppose there's a triple whammy actually, because then we've got this cost of living thing happening with this as well. So it's tough coming out, but you know what, I keep saying this, and anybody in the audience who's been at a meeting in the last while will have heard me say it, and I keep saying it, we'd have eaten hands off to be in this position 12 months ago. It's a hell of a lot better than what it was, but it isn't where we were in 2019, and it won't be for some time to come.
Yeah, and I think it'll take. You wouldn't think it now from arts festival audiences, where anywhere I've been has been jammers really, or plenty of audience. But I think overall in the sector, certainly Theatre Forum did a survey of venues there recently, and I think it was something like 12% of audiences that they surveyed had either not or were not planning to come back to live performances post-pandemic, and for a variety of reasons, and obviously cost of living is going to make a difference, but awareness of COVID and crowds and so forth. And I think that is something that's going to be an ongoing challenge, and there's also there's been, say in music, there's been kind of, at times there's been a glut of gigs going on, because there's been stuff that's been rescheduled, and also things that was scheduled to happen at that time, and all happening in one go. And I suppose it'll take a while to find an equilibrium there. Yeah.
And it's also, Deirdre, I suppose, in terms of age profile as well. Like that 20% box office hit that I referred to is from the Theatre Forum research. The older audiences are a little bit more hesitant, and COVID is one of the reasons, and it's understandable. So we've got to give them the confidence to say, look, these are safe venues. It's a safe place to be, but they've got to get back into the habit of going out. And while COVID is still there, and you get new strains and the news stories about COVID, it does increase a degree of uncertainty and I suppose nervousness for certain cohorts in the certain groups in the population, the public, who would have gone to arts events previously. So we've got to watch those numbers and get those people back as well. But it's going to take a little bit of time.
Losing the habit is a big factor, I think, for people. We've all contracted into our lives and have got out. One of the things which I suppose is something that affects people working in the business, but ultimately affects everybody, because what's available for us to go to and enjoy and experience is affected by how able people are to make work. And the basic income pilot, which has started, which is kind of it seems like a game changer to me in terms of the way people who work, potentially a game changer. I mean, it's 2,000 people or something in the pilot, and it's down the road a bit, presumably, before there might be anything wider on that. That, allied with the Arts Council's policy of pay the artist, I mean, do you think that we're thinking differently about how challenging it is to make a living in this precarious sector, and that people have different attitudes?
Yeah, one of the things when you're appointed chair of a state board, before you actually take up the position, you have to go before an Oireachtas committee and speak to the parliamentarians, the TDs and senators present. So I spoke at the Oireachtas Arts Committee in June of 2019, And I referenced that about, the life of an artist is precarious, and the vast majority of artists are on relatively low incomes. And we saw the impact of that when COVID hit, in terms of when work was wiped out overnight, what it did to the sector. So I suppose two things. One is when the early stages of the crisis, the Arts Council put together an expert advisory group. People like Fintan O'Toole, Lenny Aberson were on that, and they made a huge contribution in terms of our thinking, and assisted the council, the board and the staff, and several of their recommendations have come through. So they recommended 130 million should be the baseline funding for the Arts Council to get through the crisis, but also to deliver on the ambition of the existing programme. The basic income scheme was in there.
That was the number one recommendation, wasn't it?
And then they recommended then a cultural task force would be established. So the department took up several of those recommendations. So we're coming out, or we will come out of the crisis with the Arts Council better funded. Like in the summer of 2019, the Arts Council's budget was 75 million. It's 130 million today, so that's a significant uplift. The basic income pilot scheme will run for 3 years, 125 euros, and 2,000 randomly selected artists. So we'll see how that plays out. We would hope that the pilot is consolidated, it's expanded. It's a pilot, so it's got to be tested and see how it rolls out, but it's better there than not. So I think, if you look at what the Arts Council has been able to do with 130 million, it wasn't about creating all new schemes. There was huge surplus demand for bursaries. Festivals like Galway, the Arts Council was giving them some money, but wanted to give them more to increase the programming, the options for audiences. But the budget wasn't there. So, we've seen significant increases in the money that we've been able to put into bursaries for individual artists. That makes an impact. Programming into festivals, into arts venues around the country. Even something as, one of the programs that we run in terms of our collections, the Arts Council collection. We've seen, it's 140% increase in the budget, where the Arts Council goes out every year and buys art from galleries. I think it's 48 pieces last year.
It's a great collection.
Yeah, and it's a great collection, over 3,000 pieces now since the 1960s. About 50% of it on the road at any one time in public buildings for people to experience and enjoy. One of the last things I did before the pandemic was down in Shannon Airport, where work from the Arts Council collection is up on the walls in the airport as you come through the visitors area. And that's fantastic. But all those existing schemes were underfunded because the council didn't have resources. So 75 to 130 million does allow for impact. And if you do that over 5 or 6 years, hopefully we'll look back in 5 years' time and the budget will be higher, but it will also be the sustained impact of that increase will be evident for artists and for audiences.
When Leo Varadkar became Taoiseach in 2017, it's been bandied around an awful lot, hasn't it? But he vowed that they would double the budget, double the funding for arts and culture was it over 5 years or until 2023? 2023. There's been a lot of fuzziness around when was the doubling starting and what was included in terms of what was cultural funding, because that there's capital as well as ongoing and all of that. Certainly, the Arts Council got a big boost on foot of the pandemic, and understandably, and people lived up to the state lived up to trying to put its money where its mouth was. We're now facing cost of living. Of course, it's going to be a cost of living crisis. It's going to be a challenge, I suppose, to maintain that and build on the 130. But
yeah, fuzziness sometimes can be good, though. Certainly when you're talking to officials in government departments. No, I was reminded on several occasions.
It's doubled from yesterday.
Yeah.
From yesterday,
well,
not from 2017.
He never mentioned the Arts Council. I said, yeah, but he mentioned the arts. So that's sort of the Arts Council, so it's doubling, it's more money. I came in as chair, and my initial ambition was to get the budget over 100 million. That was the target figure, to get it into 3 digits. I thought psychologically that was hugely important. The council, that I work with a very active board, and I have fantastic council colleagues on the board, and then the executive staff. Like we worked very hard in relation to the general election in 2020 before, and then the COVID crisis, engagement with government, and the programme for government discussions. And it was an opportunity to talk to all of the political parties and to talk to the various party leaders and say, look, and you can see that in the manifesto commitments that the parties made in 2020. They were very much about supporting the arts and the Arts Council and increased funding. So Leo Varadkar's initial comments were hugely important, even if there was a fuzziness. It was doubling the arts. And I think when you interviewed me after I took over as chair of the Arts Council, I said, look, I would expect to see that commitment honoured. It happened. Would never have envisaged the context in which it would happen. But we did it during the, and I say we, the National Campaign for the Arts, and a variety of people were involved. Successes, fingerprints of many people on it. But it happened during the crisis period, and now we need to push on from there. And yeah, you mentioned cost of living. Like the Arts Council's ask of government for 2023 is 150 million. And that's not just for cost of living, but it's to be ambitious for the sector and say, look, the sector delivered during COVID. You saw when people were at, it's hard to believe now, stuck at home. Katrina mentioned it in terms of, all the hand washing, but 2 kilometres limit, and then we were suddenly grateful when we got 5 kilometres. But, we took it, the arts got a lot of people through. I was at the Druid yesterday. I can remember, with all the online production, when you couldn't get into an auditorium, but the watching plays and music, it got so many people through the crisis. And I think, and it's a hard thing to say, but I think for a lot of officials in some of the key government departments, for the first time, they saw the impact of the arts on people's lives. Like most people in this room know that. But I think for quite a few of the people who were making decisions, they saw it. And it made the job easier. So actually, my job as Arts Council Chair was made so much easier by the work of artists and arts organisations in March, April, May, June of 2020, in the key months when decisions were being made.
Related slightly to the connection between culture and government. Somehow, I'm not sure how you manage, given that you have a day job as well as the Arts Council, and you have another book that you've written, I'd say, maybe in the middle of the night or something. But you have a book that's coming out later in September, I think, which sort of tallies nicely with the relationship between government and the arts, and it's pre there being a dedicated minister, and it's about the relationship between the state in the form of Taoiseach and the arts, and it seems to be threading its way through both the art that is presented and the connections or the relationships between the individuals. And you might tell us a little bit about it. Maybe you might read something briefly from. Yeah,
I should say, like in terms of the day job, I'm very fortunate as an academic and working in Dublin City University.
All those holidays, I know.
All those holidays. I wish, I think in an earlier era perhaps, but my role in the Arts Council is an extension in terms of public service. And I'm fortunate as an academic, my job is not 9 to 5, so it allows for, I suppose, diary management. Now, that said, I did go into the Arts Council role with my eyes open, but I could never have envisaged how busy it is as chair. But the university facilitates greatly, and I should acknowledge that. So, it is, that's important. Yeah, this is, I'm a political scientist. In terms of the arts, I'm a member of the audience. I'm not an artist. Although
the politics is very useful in your role
and
in
the
the Arts
politics
Council.
of the arts is, and I think it's one of the areas where I think possibly the arts has been deficient historically in terms of its lobbying, its advocacy. It's like the arts is always there, but if you look at sport and other categories that have done particularly well, in terms of being able to knock heads together in government at political and official level. I think it's the officials are, without breaking confidences of things that conversations that were had in 2020, some of the senior officials are hugely important, because if you have them on side, when they then, this politicians say, well, what do you think of this? It makes it easier. So I think, I worked as a political journalist for 15 years. I know how politicians and the beast works. They're thin-skinned and they've long memories, so they take umbrage easily. But the funny thing is, the civil servants do as well, and they remember. So when they're peed off a bit, 3 or 4 years later, they'll say, well, yeah, but. And I got that thrown back at me quite a bit after taking over as chair, but and say, well, actually, can we draw a line, please? That happened, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But they do remember. So one of the things I'm interested in is how artists represent Taoiseach, and how Taoiseach are the holders of the head of government, how they're represented in plays, books, visual arts. And it's something I was thinking about last summer, and started. It was to be a paper, and it's now it's a short book. It's about 50,000 words, and it goes from 22 to Michael D. And when responsibility transfers in 93 from the Department of Taoiseach to the new Department of the Arts. Although other Taoiseach appeared, because Colin Murphy's work and bailed out and guaranteed would represent Brian Cowan and Bertie Ahern. So that it does go on a little bit further. It's not arts policy. It's not a political scientist writing about arts policy or a history of the Arts Council, but it weaves in. And one of the strands that runs through it is the paltry state investment and how the state failed artists and the arts for many, many years. And even Taoiseach, who would have policy achievements to their name, and there are few of them do in the art space, they never delivered on funding. And the one thing I know, and I know my board colleagues would share the same view, you can't do things without money. If you don't have money, you can't put more money into bursaries. You want to do great, we've great ambitions for creative schools, which is a fantastic program, and it's part of the ask at the moment. Creative places, you just can't put money into those programs if you don't have it. And the Arts Council, and the people who went before me as chair and on the board, and it's in every annual report of the Arts Council from 1953 onwards. The Arts Council established in 51, first meeting of the council in 52, and the first annual report the following year. We need more money, and the state never acknowledged that. So it's all of those strands that I sort of brought together. Will I read a little bit, if that's just maybe a few paragraphs? And I should say this is also in the context of the Arts Council's birthday this year, because it is 70 years from when the council first met. So maybe it picks up a little bit maybe on your earlier question, Deirdre, in relation to artists and income, and the art's been a precarious life. Yet art, whether created quickly over many years, does not come without a cost. Artists have to live. The reality of being an artist is a difficult and a precarious life. In the late 1960s, the painter Michael Kane was so, as he described it himself, out of pocket at one stage that he approached Mervyn Wall, who was the secretary of the Arts Council at the organisation's offices on Merrion Square in Dublin. Wall was positioned in a small office at the front of the building and was tasked with ensuring that no unannounced visitors got to disturb the then director, Father Donal O'Sullivan. And he's a man with another story, which is fascinating in itself, and dominated the Arts Council through the 1960s, a Jesuit priest who had a fondness for whiskey and ladies, and turns up in several different places, but he was the dominant figure in the Arts Council. Kane was not to be stymied. Before Wall could do anything, I'd opened the folding doors, gone in and suggested that they might buy some of my paintings, he recalled. O'Sullivan explained that the council could not, under its then rules, give to an individual, and that purchases had to be for a group. I am a group, Kane interjected. I've a wife and 2 kids. For long periods after independence in 1922, the Irish state neglected the arts and artists. The sector and the creators of art, however, ploughed on. For the last 70 years, the Arts Council has been fighting the corner for the arts in Ireland, more often than not in the face of great resistance to spending public money on the arts. Established under legislation in 1951, the first full meeting of the new Arts Council was held on the 25th of January 1952. In attendance were both Eamon de Valera, the then Taoiseach, and his predecessor, John A. Costello, who had brought the arts legislation which established the council through the Oireachtas the previous year. De Valera had little of importance to say, except for assuring the new council members that they had support of all sides in the National Parliament in their endeavours. Costello was more expansive, lamenting that the arts had suffered almost complete neglect, and that it wasn't easy to convince people of the value of art, literature, drama and theatre. There could be no nationality or prosperity without art, Costello asserted. And in the book Taoiseach and the Arts, I consider the place of the arts in the personal and the governmental worlds of these politicians who held the office of head of government, or more recently Taoiseach, and explore how artists have responded to these national leaders. One artist who read an early draft of the book earlier in the year commented that it was shocking how afraid politicians are of art. In the case of former Taoiseach, this situation is not for want of interaction with the arts. W.T. Cosgrave appointed Yeats and singer Gogarty to the Seanad, and in his life before being in government and being a politician, Eamon de Valera actually acted on the stage in the Abbey in an amateur production, although it may have been the poor reviews that he received in the Irish Times, no less, for his booming delivery that may have tainted his view of the arts. So did Sean Lemass, actually. It was on the stage of the Abbey as well in amateur productions before his life in government. John A. Costello was an exception in having a genuine interest in the arts, but even Costello was unable to face down the obstructionist view of the Department of Finance when his finance minister rejected arguments in 1956 for what was been proposed a fairly modest increase in Arts Council funding, their annual funding. Costello replied to the Minister for Finance in writing. The idea that categorising the Arts Council as a non-essential service is one on which I would prefer not to comment for the sake of my blood pressure. But the Arts Council didn't get its funding increase. The Taoiseach was overruled. A common strand in how these political leaders and many of their civil servant officials approached the arts was in terms of seeing arts funding as a luxury that the country could not afford. And later Taoiseach Jack Lynch, Liam Cosgrave, Garrett Fitzgerald and Albert Reynolds made little impact on government policy in the arts. Charles Haughey was an exception, but as he does in every aspect of Irish life, his contribution to the arts divides opinion. To some, he was an enlightened Renaissance prince, a modern-day Medici. For others, he suffered delusions of grandeur, someone who sought to satisfy his own vanity and elevate his status through association with artists. He's still praised in many quarters for the artist tax exemption scheme and the foundation of Aostona. Yet when it actually came to funding the arts, real money to make an impact, Arts Council budget, Haughey lines up alongside other holders of the office of Taoiseach in failing to deliver for artists and arts organisations. I'll just read that little bit about Sebastian Barry and when we come back then. In more recent times, artists have started to unpick Haughey's controversial legacy. Sebastian Barry's Hinterland draws on various aspects of Haughey's career, and the main character, John Sylvester, is a retired politician, elderly, in poor health and subject to ongoing inquiry into the source of his personal wealth. But there are still flashes of the politician of old. If they want a great national criminal, here I am, the emboldened Haughey character proclaims. There would be no modern era, no change, no new world without me. I am the giant of the modern era. And I should say that that's the early 90s. Haughey was gone by the time I came into journalism, but I was fortunate to interview him on a couple of occasions in Kinseely for a book I was working on. And the Cracken Tribunal report had published, and I was the deal with I wasn't to mention anything to do with tribunals, just the issue I was working on. But when the tape recorder went off, it was a radio interview. He was old and retired and in ill health. But when the tape recorder went off and he started talking about the Tribunal of Inquiry and giving out about them, I could see those flashes of the politician of old. He used a great phrase. He said, no longer is a man's castle his home. And I'm looking around this massive room, which was bigger than one bed. What a castle. It was bigger than the one-bed apartment I lived in at the time. The stage direction in Hinterland makes the art central to the Haughey character. The setting is a private study in a Georgian mansion outside Dublin. Books On the walls, modern Irish painting, Labrocky, O'Malley. Throughout the text, there are many references to literary giants, Yeats, Behan, Heaney, Tennyson, Tennessee Williams. Whether these references are out of appreciation for these artists and their work or pure vanity is left for the audience to determine. We see the Haughey character toiling to capture recollections of his father in Northern Ireland in a letter that he's struggling to write to two elderly aunts. He bitterly observes, "To think Seamus Heaney turned his Derry childhood into the stuff of a Nobel Prize." Might leave it there?
Yeah, yeah. Look forward to
That's
that.
just a little sample.
Yeah, look forward to it. On a different tack, I suppose, there has been in wider society and in the world in the cultural world as well, there has been over the last number of years a kind of a reckoning for past behaviour and action and attitudes, and with the Me Too movement and an awareness of bullying and harassment and abuses, which has been an issue within the cultural world too, and I suppose because it's much in the spotlight, people focus on whether it's film or theatre, music and traditional music in Ireland, all sorts of stories loom around, and also there has been a kind of a reckoning, and the Arts Council is in a difficult position in a way in that it funds organisations, but it is not responsible for running individual organisations, and yet has to ensure that that organisations are run properly. But it's the responsibility is a complicated thing, and I know that the dignity and respect policies that the Arts Council has introduced over the past. You can't talk, I know, about things that happened before your time, which have ongoing. But I suppose within your time, a reckoning or a beginning of a reckoning, maybe about question marks about things that happened in the Abbey Theatre, came to the fore, and in some of the correspondence between the Arts Council and the Abbey, it's clear that information was being sought by the Arts Council from the Abbey Theatre about payments that appear to have been made to former directors there, including redundancy payments, peculiarly after fixed term contracts had finished, and also some other payments. And the reckoning does not appear to me to have fully played out. And you are probably constrained, possibly legally, from talking about it. Do you feel that that justice has been done? Do you feel that people who may have complained about certain things have been treated well? Do you think the truth will come out? The Arts Council commissioned a report from Mazars, which has delivered and has not been published. Is information in that? Does it spill light on what actually happened?
I suppose taking the wider issue first, like everybody is entitled to be treated properly, with dignity and respect, and to go to work and work in a comfortable environment. And that doesn't apply just to the arts, it applies to academia, it applies to journalism. So there's a professionalism expected of all of us and how we interact with each other. That's the minimum standard. And like we saw the Irish Theatre Institute report last year, which Jane Daly and Siobhan Burke were responsible for. And some of the evidence in that was startling and concerning. And it's not any one in organisation or that we're referring to. That was a report survey of artists in different art forms. We were concerned enough as a board and as the Arts Council that we invited Siobhan and Jane to present the report to the board. And the Arts Council staff are working with the Theatre Institute on the Safe to Create programme, and the department is involved in that as well. So funding training, and we've said we will put money into training, not just for large organisations, for small organisations, to ensure that people are aware of what is expected, but also if people are concerned that they know where to go, so they're not on their own. So it's yeah, you're right, it's a wider issue for society, but our responsibility in the Arts Council is to ensure that the environment is right. We have a human rights, equality and diversity policy which we try to live as a council, and we want all organisations to live as well. So that's the broad I suppose, position, and it's something that we're keeping a watching eye on. So it's not just something that we engaged with and we dropped, it's active. So whatever was there previously, you know, we can't just say that was the past. We have to make sure that the present and people coming into the sector, young people coming into the sector, they're coming into jobs in an environment where it's safe, where they're treated properly. And, you know, a lot of people working in the arts are freelancers. There is a hierarchical structure, but we need to ensure that somebody's at the top of the pile and somebody's at the, you know, the end, start of their career, they're all treated the same. So that's hugely important, Deirdre. And the Safe to Create programme, the training, ensuring that organisations adhere to best practice, and if people are concerned, they know where to go. We've put money in and we will continue to support organisations. And you're right, the Arts Council can't run these organisations on a day-to-day basis for a variety of reasons, but we do ensure, and we are and reminding people of best practice. So that's the broad issue. In relation to the Abbey Theatre, it's been an ongoing issue for the Council, engaging with the Abbey over the last 14, 15 months. We were on notice in relation to an issue that was going on in the Abbey, which the Abbey, you know, obviously as an independent organisation was dealing with. And then additional information was brought to my attention as chair, which was unknown to the Council previously. And over the last year or so, the Arts Council board, but in particularly the executive staff, and a huge amount of work with Maureen Kennedy and her colleagues engaging with this issue, and the board as well, to ensure that this matter was approached and dealt with properly. It's ongoing. The FY legislation obviously allowed you to get access to material which was published in the Irish Times, and that gave us heavily redacted for a variety of reasons, and I've no involvement in that, as you know. So yeah, there's been extensive engagement between the Arts Council and the Abbey in relation to the issues of concern, and I use the word concern. I think the information that was brought to our attention and the issues that we've been dealing with were of significant concern to the board, to myself as chair, and to my colleagues. And these are serious issues to which they need to be dealt with properly, and we've been dealing with that. The independent consultants were sent in to look at financial and governance arrangements in the organisation, and that report is being worked through at the moment. It is positive to say that the Abbey has accepted the issues and their impacting that have impacted on them, and the recommendations in the report. We've attached conditions to funding for 2022. So there's a review of HR and procurement policies in the Abbey underway, and we've also requested that there's a cultural audit of the organisation, and the Abbey have accepted those recommendations. So that's an indication of the seriousness which the Council is continuing to deal with these issues. Obviously, I'm not privy to all the details, nor should I be, because it's an independent organisation. But the information that we are aware of was of significant concern that we had to act in this way.
Are you reassured that things were handled properly, appropriately?
I think the fact that we have, there is a continuing HR review and a cultural audit would indicate that the Council, and it's not me, you know, as an individual, even though I am the chair, I work with colleagues. I think the board still had concerns that it was of the view that there was need for further review and reflection of the organisation.
Worthy of a politician, this.
I don't want to land either of us in trouble.
We have 10.
Can I just fun
Yes.
on that? And obviously, there's a new executive team came in, Katrina and Mark last summer, and they're working through this with their other colleagues, and they're still they've managed over the 12-month period to produce fantastic work on the stage, and I think that should be acknowledged as well.
Absolutely.
The current production of translations is super. I saw it in Belfast and in Dublin, so just to we are dealing with these issues still.
Okay, ongoing.
Yeah.
We're going to open this to questions. The only thing that I had intended to ask you about sort of venues and workspaces for artists, and maybe something like that might come up in questions from the audience. But so if there is anyone who there's someone over there with the hand up. Who's?
Can I just say I didn't realise Katrina and Mark were in the audience. Hi.
Thanks. Hi. Kevin, your appointment to the Arts Council coincided almost within months of our government declaring a climate emergency without taking a vote on it. I'm wondering how you see the Arts Council responding to the climate emergency, and perhaps in a very specific way, given your forensic understanding of how advertising works, the appropriateness of, for instance, fossil fuel sponsorship in the arts.
Well, if I can answer it in a number of ways, I suppose at a council table, at a board table, we're climate change and sustainability is on our agenda. Even something as practical as the building that the Arts Council works in Merrion Square, which in terms of sustainability and climate is not fit for purpose. So that's on our agenda at the moment. In terms of, we fund work where artists engage with these issues. So the Eco Boat, which came through the open call scheme last year, and the ask of government in terms of our pre-budget submission this year has a number of issues identified, including the COVID recovery workspaces, but also sustainability and climate change, that we want to be more proactive in this space. So that's, I suppose, as a council level. In relation to the latter issue, in relation to sponsorship, that's obviously for individual organisations themselves, and I'm not sure, what the actual example would be. It's something that I'm not familiar with. But in terms of where,
sorry,
yeah,
you're speaking at a festival
yeah.
that's sponsored by a fossil fuel company.
Well, I suppose in terms of maybe that's a question for the Galway Arts Festival themselves. It's something I haven't given a huge amount of thought to before you asked the question now, but I will reflect on it and we'll put it into our conversations. But what we control ourselves, it's an active conversation. Like we had a meeting with Minister Martin at the end of May, and when we were taking her through the priorities for 2022 and where we were going in 23, and climate and sustainability was there. So it's something that is on the list, and we're working on at the moment. And I think, not to hold to deadline, there may be a new policy either published towards the end of this year or in the first couple of months of next year in relation to sustainability. So which will be for the sector to reflect on as well. So but your latter point I will take into that conversation as well. So thank you.
There's someone over here.
Hello, thank you very much for a really interesting conversation. I'm just wondering about, you're speaking as chair of the Arts Council, and I'm wondering particularly, we're in Galway, which is at the edge of the largest Gaeltacht in the world, and bilingualism and the constitutional status of the language being very important. And I know your reports, etc., are published in both languages. But in terms of, again, I suppose it's a question of those who are funded by the Arts Council and indeed the makeup of the staff of the Arts Council themselves, the executive. There are very few places to go for Irish language artists and makers. Those who work, I know there's Ali na Gaeltachta, but again, it's kind of siloed to the work of the Arts Council. And it is a minoritized language with a constitutional status, but a European constitutional status as well. And wondering, from a political point of view, the message that it gives that the Arts Council is not more visible. There have been lots of internal reports, and we're still waiting for more unpublished reports. Martin Drury did one in the early 90s, where it was acknowledged there wasn't enough work being done for Irish and those who speak. We have another one on the shelves again. So just as a national institution, where it is very directly politically funded, the invisibility of this language within this organisation is, and particularly how it speaks, that fear of supporting it publicly, is having a massive impact on audiences. And if you compare it to census figures and the amount of people who speak Irish in this country, it's not servicing those people that are actually audience members and need to be serviced.
Well, I know in terms of the 70th anniversary publication, the pamphlet that's recently published, one of the essays is in Irish. I'm not an Irish speaker, but several of my board colleagues are fluent Irish speakers, and they champion the language at the board table. And we have had conversations around some of those issues. There are organisations that are funded and schemes are funded, and so it's not that the Irish language is discriminated in that regard. When we come to looking at reviewing funding decisions in relation to, say, literature, there's a long list of awardees in the Irish language. But again, maybe I'm curious about the points you're making, so I might have a chat with you afterwards, but that wouldn't have been my experience over the last 2 years.
I suppose I'm speaking of the executive of the Arts Council and the ability to go to an Irish language person who has that remit within the Arts Council. There doesn't seem to be a person to go to. There's some people who speak Irish, but they don't have that responsibility. Okay,
well, I certainly, again, like the gentleman earlier, it's a good point, and I'll take back, but I will say my experience of the Arts Council executive, they've come through, like everybody, the last 2.5 years, well, they've put in a tremendous shift as well, and my experience of them is that they have been, they're open, but that's something to certainly reflect on again and take back. But, I do have a number of very strong board colleagues who've made and championed the Irish language at the board's table. So without breaking any confidence of our discussions, I can tell you that has happened and does happen.
I think that there is, and it just strikes me an argument to be made in terms of, is it appropriate to have, that it is marginalising and siloising Irish language if you say, okay, well, this is the rest of it, and this is who you go to if you want to fund or discuss the development of something that happens to be in the Irish language. I would have thought it is much more appropriate and all-encompassing to actually have, well, this is theatre, and this is who's dealing with literature, and this is who's dealing with music, and so on. And if it's in English, or if it's in Irish, or if it's in whatever, it's all on, that it's dealt with on a level playing pitch. To marginalise it would be.
And yet you have to write your applications in English, or the executive of the Arts Council are reading your application in translation. So you're not on a level playing field.
Okay,
yeah, and maybe that's the way that our world works. Most people, yeah.
Or you employ people in
Yeah, we can. I certainly could take it up. Can I just?
Yeah, but then you're making it this tiny siloed minority that these are the people who deal with anything to do with Irish language, and I don't know.
It's not a tiny siloed minority.
Yeah.
It is an actual government siloing and minoritizing of something that is actually not that tiny.
Just one positive thing on languages, like if you take the more recent policies that have been published by the Arts Council, including the Human Rights and Equality and Diversity Policy, like you go onto the Arts Council, but it's available on the Arts Council's website in seven different languages for different communities. So that's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there is a community that's always kind of left out. Yeah.
There's somebody up there on the back row, or second from back row, I think, with her hand up there. Oh, Maureen, it's Maureen there.
Deirdre, I'm here.
Is
Sorry,
it?
Maureen Kennedy from the Arts Council. So just before that person comes in, so just to add, in response to Marianne's query there, we'll be making 2 Irish language appointments in the next 6 months, and I hear the points that you make in terms of the application process and so on. And we'll also be looking at a review of Irish language theatre across the island of Ireland. So there will be a specific Irish language literature appointment made, and then separately an Irish language officer role created. And maybe just back to the previous point made, that Galway International Arts Festival is itself developing a green policy, and the Arts Council is working very closely with Julie's Bicycle and with Native Arts in terms of helping organisations and in the area of sustainability.
Thank you, Maureen.
There's a lady up there, I think.
And there's somebody here.
Hello.
Right there.
I have a comment and a question, both unrelated. A comment which is something that's very positive that I just wanted to acknowledge, credit where credit is due. I was very impressed with the improvement in the clarity and the process for accessibility funding that's been brought in for the recent awards. I think it's very clear and it's a good system in place. My question is less of a direct question and more that I'd like your opinions from the Arts Council perspective on the topic that you touched on at the beginning, that during the pandemic and kind of politicians' views in general, that it's harder to get that appreciation or backing for the arts compared to, say, something like sports, which I think became very apparent during the pandemic, even in terms of guidelines for events and capacity, which made it very difficult for artists and even for things like facilitation. It was okay to teach sports, but not okay to teach drama, stuff like that. But anyway, I'm derailing. But in terms of that cultural view of the arts, I was wondering what the Arts Council's perspective is about changing that view of the culture, because I know a concern that I have as an artist creating contemporary work targeted at young audiences. And when I say young audiences, I mean under 30s, not children's theatre, just to make that distinction, is that even when it's contemporary work very clearly for young audiences, predominantly the theatre is attended by older audiences. And bridging that gap and making theatre appear accessible and arts in general for younger audiences, is that a responsibility that is on artists to create work that will bring in that younger generation to make the arts sustainable in Ireland going forward long term? Or is that a responsibility of an arts council, or is that a shared plan for the sustainability of long-term arts appreciation in Ireland? So like I said, not a direct question, but I'd love your insights on that topic.
I've been, one of the privileges of being chair of the Arts Council is actually being invited to and getting to events all over the country. So, you know, here this weekend, seeing the Druid production, or Home, or True West on Friday night. You know, if you take something like Amy Conroy's play, Look, Just Kissed You Hello, which I saw on the Peacock, the age profile there was very different, you know, to the age profile you're describing. So I think sometimes it depends on the play, depends on the auditorium, you know, the place. And as I say, I've been fortunate to be in a lot of different venues over the last 3 years, well, the first 6 months and then the last number of months.
And then in your living room.
And then in the living room in between. And I think, yes, there's a perception that some of the audiences are older, but when you're actually looking around the room, depending on the production, and I think that's why I suppose seeing people like Amy Conroy, Deirdre Kinahan coming through as playwrights, it's the work brings the audiences in. And like the Arts Council is not there to direct in terms of programming, but when you see challenging work or you see new writers coming through on the stage, that I think opens up those venues, those theatres to different audiences. So, you know, I suppose that's also where we hopefully, with a little bit extra money, companies can take risks, you know, with new people, with different programming. And as I say, that on the stage of the Peacock was a fantastic play, which she I think directed as well. But in any event, the audience was younger, so it varies. But the extra money hopefully will allow for different types of programming. And actually, maybe coming out of COVID, because we were talking about this earlier, hopefully the next 2 to 3 years will be a golden age in terms of the arts, because there will be so much pipeline of work coming through that we, as audiences, we're going to be, really benefit from seeing some fantastic work.
Yeah, I think maybe younger and more independent companies might tend to make work that's less safe and may attract younger audiences, and also tends to be more multidisciplinary in terms of music and sound and bringing in other art forms, and can be really exciting.
The Anews, This Is Pop Baby, like they're doing really innovative, cutting edge work, and that does bring in different audiences. And we need, it's to encourage that is hugely important.
I think looking around audiences, the age profile is determined by the kind of work that's on stage a lot of the time.
Deirdre, we're going to have to close up shortly.
Yeah, is there?
We'll take one more question.
There's one more question here.
So my question was, how do you both envision the future of arts in Ireland? You already answered. You see the golden age coming, correct?
Well, I hope that as a member of the audience, it's going to be fantastic for the next number of years. I hope we can get out from under COVID. I hope that we can continue to be in this environment. I hope the government continues to fund, and I hope the Arts Council's budget goes higher, because the more money there is, the more work can be created, can create jobs, and that creates the work. So I would hope that, maybe for the first time since the foundation of the arts, the creation of the Arts Council and the foundation of the state, we're moving into a different space in relation to funding of the arts. That allows then for more work to be created.
Yeah, I think that's...
But getting out from under COVID first.
Yeah.
What are the prospects for individual artists for right now?
Well, if you look in terms of what the Arts Council has done in terms of like the extra money we've put into bursaries. So there's a 200% increase in bursaries. So there's an opportunity for artists. The basic income scheme is obviously there as well. And workspaces, we didn't touch on workspaces, but just briefly, it's a pressing issue for the council, and we've been, Maureen and her colleagues and myself and the board, this is a priority issue. We've been engaging with the department. We have a very ambitious proposal in with the department in relation to workspaces, including in Galway. And we've been involved in very detailed discussions with Dublin Port with a very exciting project, which if we pull off, will really provide an extensive number of spaces for artists to work. And it's a huge issue. It's coming through all of the research. Spaces have shrunk. So in terms of, for artists, the money is there. Now we need to actually work on the spaces for them to operate in and live in and work in.
Just on that quickly, is there anything pending in the Arts Council's radar around recommendations on pay scales and terms for those on, it's called the non-creative side, but those in venues, running venues, where the pay scales in recent surveys done across arts venues and spaces, many of the pay scales are incredibly low for those working day out in those day in, day out in those venues around the country. Just wonder if there's anything on that front.
I can see we've been under the clock here. Can I just say briefly, obviously we have the Pay the Artist policy, which is hugely important, and we challenge organisations to implement that, to enact that, and in their funding applications now they have to describe how they're implementing the Pay the Artist policy. We don't set rates, obviously, because that's not something... But
the staff you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't get involved in terms of setting rates, but it's the policy and the broad brush policy is where the Arts Council is.
I think we have gone over a little bit. There's been some really good questions, and thank you very much, Kevin, for sharing your thoughts. And we are a little bit over, but still plenty of time to get to a television screen and get your jersey on and Galway Boo, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
might have for Kevin. I want to thank him and Deirdre for giving us a really fascinating conversation. And I also just want to take this opportunity to thank all of the staff here who've been working with me over the last 2 weeks on First Thought. They have been absolutely delightful, proficient, efficient, and a joy to deal with, and the volunteers who have been working outside as well. So please give them a round of applause.